Fiquem à vontade para começar, por favor.
Hello, everyone. Can we test the interpretation? If everything is okay, please give me a sign and I will start with the actual talk. Is it coming through fine in the Portuguese channel?
Está...
Perfect. Thank you, everyone. Welcome to our talk today. I'm Mark Datysgeld. I'm Brazilian, but I'll be speaking English today. On behalf of our esteemed panelists, we'll have a dialogue on cybersecurity. It's a great pleasure to have them here today. We will be discussing some upcoming challenges in cybersecurity, such as the NIS2 initiative from Europe, and also upcoming trends in cybersecurity. It's a great pleasure that the Brazilian Association of Software is hosting this presentation today, as this theme is not discussed nearly as much as it should in Brazil and Latin America more broadly. And this is great for innovation and for us to be able to bring new teams to the software community in Brazil and to everyone that follows ABES, all of his associates. So great thanks for this opportunity. We will start today with an introduction from Vice-President Paulo Roque, who will be explaining a little bit about the association. And from there, we will move into the discussion per se. So I would like to ask Paulo to have the word now. And please introduce us, Paulo. Thank you.
Boa tarde a todos. O meu nome é Paulo Roque, sou vice-presidente da ABES, Associação Brasileira das Empresas de Software. Vou colocar uma pequena apresentação da ABES na tela. Esse é o evento que nós estamos fazendo hoje. A ABES tem feito dezenas de eventos na área de tecnologia da informação para milhares de pessoas que têm assistido. Nós temos hoje uma rede muito ativa de eventos na área de TI. O lema da ABES, o principal objetivo dela é auxiliar o Brasil a construir um país mais digital e menos desigual. Nós temos um país em que a gente possa...
Paulo, a tua apresentação não está aparecendo. Se você quiser compartilhar, não está aparecendo para a gente.
Positivo. Um momento, por favor. Está aparecendo?
Sim, está ótimo. Obrigada.
Ok. O nosso propósito, o propósito da associação é construir um país mais digital e menos desigual, como eu estava falando. Para isso, a gente se esforça em democratizar o conhecimento, a gente faz esses eventos para poder transmitir conhecimento não só para a área de TI, mas para a sociedade como um todo, e a gente está empenhado em gerar novas oportunidades para pessoas, não só para empresas, nós somos uma entidade empresarial, mas não só para empresa, como também para profissionais que queiram entrar na área de tecnologia de informação. Hoje nós estamos sofrendo no Brasil e no mundo todo um verdadeiro apagão da falta de mão de obra especializada, e a ABES se propõe a ajudar neste propósito também. Isso gera uma melhor qualidade de vida e gera uma vida mais inclusiva, né? Nós temos a intenção e estamos trabalhando nisso e temos sido bem-sucedidos em criar um mercado que seja inovador, que seja dinâmico, que seja ético, isso é importante, ele se sustente e seja competitivo. O Brasil tem um mercado competitivo a nível mundial. Nós temos hoje mais de 2.000 associados, 77% dos nossos associados são micro e pequenas empresas. Tá? Nós estamos em todos os estados do Brasil, menos 2 na prática, né? Em 24 estados. Né? Nós estamos há 35 anos no mercado, nós começamos há muito tempo atrás, e uma coisa muito importante, 85% do setor de software e serviço, 85% do faturamento do setor de software é associado à ABES. Nós temos um programa de apoio a startups também que queiram começar, trabalhando junto com investidores e junto com incubadoras, e esses planos estão à disposição para quem quiser saber e quem quiser nos consultar no nosso portal, nós temos mais informações sobre isso. Nós temos também uma ferramenta que é muito popular, que é o diagnóstico da Lei Geral de Proteção de Dados. É difícil uma empresa saber se ela está cumprindo os itens demandados pela Lei Geral de Proteção de Dados, que é uma lei nova e muito radical comparado com as práticas anteriores. Entrando no portal da ABES, você consegue acessar esse diagnóstico e fazer um diagnóstico da sua empresa. Hoje, nós temos que as empresas que já preencheram esse questionário, apenas 40% dos requisitos da LGPD são atendidos por essas empresas. Então, existe um caminho muito grande pela frente e a ABES tem trabalhado através de divulgação, de documentos, de palestras. Nós temos um grupo de trabalho que trabalha com a LGPD e que as empresas podem trocar ideias, ele é muito ativo nessa área. Nós temos também um guia de fomento para a inovação no setor de tecnologia da informação, que traz todas as fontes de recurso, sendo eles não reembolsáveis, o antigo fundo perdido, né? Recursos do governo não reembolsáveis, recursos reembolsáveis que existem à disposição de quem quiser participar e fazer uma alavancagem na sua empresa. Nós temos um programa chamado Uma Empresa Ética, em que, se a empresa segue as normas que nós passamos e as orientações que nós damos, nós emitimos um certificado que essa empresa trabalha de forma ética, está dentro do programa de compliance de uma empresa ética. A ABES tem feito uma mobilização pela redução de desigualdade, ela tem um convênio com o reuniu, que é uma empresa de coleta de lixo eletrônico, e depois de ser coletado, uma parte desta receita é distribuída para fins sociais. É importante também a gente mencionar que o grande evento nosso este ano será virtual, vai ser no dia 14, 15 e 16 de setembro, em que nós vamos estar com diversas palestras ocorrendo. O mote desse evento agora é Ondas Exponenciais e Resiliência Digital. Esse evento é atendido normalmente por centenas de empresas e é um evento marcante no setor da tecnologia da informação. Muito obrigado, e eu passo a palavra de volta ao Mark.
Thank you very much, Paulo, for getting us started. I'm to every translator, I am back to the English language. Again, to anybody who didn't catch the start, welcome. We will be doing an international event today. I'm Mark from Brazil, but I'll be speaking in English today to facilitate the mediation of this conversation. So without further ado, I would like to introduce our first speaker. He's Boué. He's from BSA, the Software Alliance. You know, I got to know him through one of our great contacts over at ICANN. And when I was asking for an expert in NIS2, and this person who I was asking is an expert herself. So when she told me, you should talk to Thomas, I knew he was someone we needed to bring to talk to us over here. And his organization has been doing policy in Europe, the Middle East, and the African region, has representation in several countries around the world. And it is a great pleasure to have you here today, Thomas. Why don't you get started? And I will put your presentation up as well. Thank you very much for being here today.
No, thank you very much, Mark. Thank you, Polo. Thank you for Abstra for having me with you today to talk about this. And thank you for the very kind introduction, but also for the tall order that you've put me into with your very nice words about me. So just a quick word. So BSA, indeed, we are a global organization headquartered in Washington, D.C. We have offices all around the world, including one in Sao Paulo, and we represent enterprise software companies. So our members are, companies that are primarily providing services to businesses, be it large or small, to governments, and who are helping to, the digital world as we know it today. And then, today is a case in point, with COVID, the ability for all of us to be, around this virtual table and to be able to communicate is part of what the services of our members are doing, really providing the backbone and all the tools. Yes, I will. Of the that are being used around the world today. And as an organization that focuses a lot on policy and regulatory developments, we follow developments all around the world on issues that are pertinent and important for software companies, for cloud companies. And cybersecurity is indeed one of them, one that we have been looking at for a long time, in Europe, in the US, and all around the world. The presentation that I wanted to do today to you is partly based on sort of two parts. One is the regulatory landscape on cybersecurity in the European Union. And the second one is also how we as an organization, as software companies, think about the global challenges of cybersecurity and how we software companies can address those and work together hand in hand with policymakers, with regulators, with other industries, with academics, on ensuring that we strive for proper, cybersecurity. So, and Mark, you mentioned indeed the NIS2 directive, which is top of mind for a lot of people. But I wanted to also bring that also in perspective on the entirety of the regulatory environment, or some of the regulatory environment around cybersecurity in the European Union. And so I have a couple of slides on this, and you'll see. If you can move now, Mark, to my first slide on the what we're seeing today. So there's already some legislation that have happened in Europe over the last years, and the NIS directive was the first ever European-wide cybersecurity legislation that was enacted in 2016. And the directive, was trying to do two things. The first one was to facilitate the information sharing amongst the EU member states cybersecurity agencies. The EU sometimes is seen from the outside world as one monolithic block, but the EU is a strange animal because it has today 27 member states with a variety of level of preparedness with regard to cybersecurity. And some countries, are very well advanced for a variety of reasons. You think, for instance, Estonia is a very far advanced country on cybersecurity. They suffered major attacks back in 2009, and they had to respond and to go back to that. So, and then you have other countries, that are less attuned to cybersecurity because, for historical reason and others. And so bringing, the same level, the harmonization, that's what the EU is trying to do with regulations. How do we harmonize for, the single market, a number of policies? And so this facilitation of information amongst the cybersecurity agencies was important to ensure they create trust and this information sharing. At the same time, the NIS also recognized that a variety of sectors and critical infrastructures, transport, financial services, utilities, relied more and more on digital technologies, software, cloud, and others. And how do you make sure that these companies, these sectors who, have not thought necessarily cybersecurity as a top priority would also be brought into the discussion and try to make them more secure, more more in line, and create a baseline of risk management obligations for these different highly critical sectors, but also how do you report incidents? Because let's face it, cybersecurity is a goal that everybody wants to attain, but there are attacks, there are things happening all the time, and how do you ensure that when these happen, then you create a real way to do that? And so the NIS directive also recognized that certain sectors like cloud computing service providers that offer services to a variety of these sectors should have different obligations, and so there was some elements of that were very much welcome, and but that still brought in a lot of cybersecurity in the mindset of a variety of sectors who did not necessarily think of that before. Following that, and this was the first ever, and then following that, there's a few more that came through the EU Cybersecurity Act, which was finalized in 2019, was trying to again bring some trust and bring some level of comprehension for a variety of actors on how ICT products and services could be made more secure. And the Cybersecurity Act is a very broad legislation that tasks ENISA. So ENISA is the European Cybersecurity Agency with developing schemes for cybersecurity certification, and that is a tantalizing task because it goes from consumer IoT products to high-end cloud services. How do you create these certification? And I'll pause here, but I'll come back in a minute on what's happening today with a scheme for cloud computing. Finally, the last piece of legislation that was adopted earlier this year actually is the Cybersecurity Competence Center, and there, so NIS was there to bring information sharing, try to create some risk management. The act was about doing some certification. The Cybersecurity Competence Center was to say, well, should we try to develop cybersecurity solutions in the European Union, and how we can try to create some R&D centers where companies will come in with public authorities and try to work together to assess risks, assess needs, and work on technological capacities to try and move forward. And this one is a thing where we spend a lot of time working on, because as a global organization representing global companies, we wanted to make sure, and as cybersecurity is a global phenomenon, a global issue, that global companies or companies from all around the world could also try to come in and try to work together to achieve these objectives. And the jury's still out on whether that will be possible. There's some language in the final regulation that creates some potential issues from our perspective, because it's companies that are established in the European Union. Now, establishment is not necessarily defined in EU law, and we want to make sure that companies who have a presence, be they Brazilian, be they American, be they Chinese, be they Japanese, or others, can come in and try to work together, because the goal is the same, trying to ensure that we can move ahead and prepare for attacks and address those in the most appropriate manner. Yeah, so that's for what's already on the table. Now, Mark, if you can move to my next slide, that'd be great, because then there's like three main cybersecurity legislation that are being discussed, being developed in the European Union, in Brussels, as we speak today. The first one is the NIS directive. The other one is the Digital Operational Resilience Act. So that's a sector-specific regulation for the financial sector to ensure that in the financial sector there is also robust cybersecurity protections. And then there's the scheme for cloud services. So the NIS Directive 2.0 really builds on what the NIS 1 did, and there's some really positive developments there. A very central element to cybersecurity, and I'm sure that you all know that, is the supply chain. So not individual actions or activities will be sufficient. It's about the entirety of the ecosystem of the supply chain, and the NIS2 recognizes that. the NIS2 also recognizes that in the context of incident reporting and others, if there's a duplication of authorities and supervisory authorities responsible, that will actually defeat the purpose. So there's a centralization of that, and that is a good thing. Now, in its current form, and it's still being discussed, will be, we, our members, a variety of other actors are still engaging, will continue to engage with the European Union, with the member states, with the European Parliament, others, and I encourage you and your companies and whoever wants to also engage to also bring voices to the debate, because these are important as laws are being developed. And then I'll mention three concerns that we have as we look at the NIS 2.0. The first one is tighter baseline requirements, in particular with regard to incident notification. So the current text of the NIS 2 directive, compels or would compel an operator of an essential service to report an incident within 24 hours of them being aware of that. Now, 24 hours may sound like a long time. I think in a human life, it's a long time. When you're dealing with cybersecurity attacks, by the time you find out about it, you try to assess the extent of the damage, you try to see what steps can be taken, 24 hours is actually not a long time. Trying to have something that is more actionable, more workable, that would actually, be more in line with practices would be more important. I think, reporting makes sense and is an important element, because I think that should not be overlooked. But if the first thing you do is report as opposed to trying to figure out what to do, then I think we all may have a problem. The NIS2 also imposes more supervisory powers from supervisory authorities, including outside audits. And outside audits may sound like a good idea, but when you go into a company that's providing services to a variety of different customers and actors, there's confidentiality agreements that are in place. And how do you ensure that the authorities will only look at what they're supposed to look at and not other things? That raises questions from our perspective. And the final element that we really are concerned about is the NIS directive, which is supposed to be the baseline cybersecurity regulation or cybersecurity legislation across the EU for everything cyber, is actually a lex specialis. So when there will be sectoral regulation, NIS will move aside in order to leave other rules to be adapted. Now, if you are in a critical infrastructure sector, let's say you're in a utility, power plants or something, that may be fine. But if you're a cloud computing provider and you're providing services to all these sectors, and as a cloud operator, you're also part of the NIS directive, we need to ensure that the rules will be the same everywhere, because otherwise, according to each situation, you may have different authorities to report to, you may have different requirements, you may have different timelines, and that will add to the burden, that would not necessarily increase the cybersecurity and the preparedness of all of this. And that is the thing that we're very worried about, especially as it relates to DORA. So the next one that we're very much looking at, because DORA is very specific. DORA is about the financial services sector. And in DORA, in the current proposal, the regulator for this regulation will be the financial services regulator, who traditionally are focused on financial services issues, not on cybersecurity. And all the CCERT, even ENISA, the European Cybersecurity Agency, is not part of this ecosystem to try to work it out. That is a thing that causes concerns to us, because companies in the software sector, in the cloud sector, which will be part of the two legislations, may have different regulators according to the scenario, and that is something that we need to avoid at all costs. The thresholds for notification of incidents are also set differently in NIS 2.0 and in DORA, and that means that, again, if you're there's an incident, and incidents, I think, happen whether we like it or not, and whether we want to admit it or not, they do happen. But if you start having to figure out every time, okay, what's the threshold for this, for that, that's something that's not going to be possible. And trying to ensure that both legislations go in the same direction to try to have consistency, and the harmonization that the EU is trying to push is extremely important. The one thing in DORA that also creates concerns in a way that the auditing schemes in NIS give us pause, as I said a minute ago, is for resilience and penetration testing. So DORA foresees that there can be some tests to make sure that the ICT providers providing services to the financial services institutions will have state-of-the-art cybersecurity. So you simulate a cyber attack. That is fine. That is good. That is a way that things are done. However, how do you do that if you're trying to penetrate a system for an ICT provider that provides services to a variety of sectors, not just in the financial services sector? You may have unintended consequences. And so there's a lot of ways where technology companies today, ICT, software, cloud, do have ways to do this testing that is not as intrusive, as not penetrating, and that should be recognized and seen in there. So, these are some of the considerations that we are sharing, us, our members, a variety of other actors are sharing with the European policymakers that are still developing these situations. And the final regulation that I will mention in this context is the cybersecurity certification scheme for cloud services. So as I mentioned, it derived from the Cybersecurity Act. ENISA released, about a year ago, less than a year ago, the scheme for cloud in and of itself. And this, the idea behind this certification scheme was to boost the trust across the EU on the use of cloud computing. And you may know that, you may not know that, but the cloud adoption, especially by small businesses in Europe, is relatively low. It could be a lot better, and the Commission and ENISA, have made the assessment that, in order to boost the cloud adoption, which could actually give a lot of benefits, we need to create more trust, and the trust is via this scheme. Now, there are some concerns with the scheme as well as we're looking at it, because if you are a cloud service provider, the chances are that you are operating in more than one market, that you are a global company. And as a global company or as a multinational company, you will follow international standards and you will follow international best practices. That is the thing that you do. Now, there are some in the scheme, some divergences with international standards. For instance, when you want to certify for assurance levels, and so the schemes foresees 3 different assurance levels: basic, substantial, and high. International best practices, international way of doing this is that for low assurance levels, companies can self-certify, right? So it's so insignificant, or the risk is so low, that it doesn't really matter if you have a third party auditing it. Now, the scheme here foresees that for all levels there will be a third party validation. Now you may say, well, that may make sense because you bring somebody additional. Yes, but there are 600 requirements across all the level of assurance levels. Now 600, if you're a very large company, you may be able, if you are like a smaller cloud provider, that may lead to significant burden, significant compliance costs, and that is something that is not necessarily going to help. But maybe the place where we're also quite concerned with the scheme for cloud services is that the way that the Cybersecurity Act and the schemes are designed is that they are meant to be voluntary. So companies can choose to certify or not, and that is a good and sound practice, because it's up to each company to want to do the thing or not. Now, so there's discretion left for member states to actually impose in public procurement at national level that companies have to certify to the schemes, and therefore that can create some market access barriers for companies that have high level of cybersecurity but that have not been recognized by the schemes. to not be able to participate, to not be able to provide services. And that would do two things. One, from a company perspective, it limits your ability to participate in public tenders. But also from a perspective of a government or an agency that looks to have the best state-of-the-art solutions, that you have less choice because there's less companies that have this certification. So these are the things that concern us, that working, and there's a number of discussions. My colleague in Brazil used to tell me that LGPD took a long time to happen as legislation, and the same is true in Europe. Things take time. Things go all the way. That is why it's important for all interested parties to engage, to work it out, and to try to bring all these points to the table. But ultimately, and I will pause here for the EU landscape, legislative landscape on cybersecurity, which is, as you see, quite extensive. Cybersecurity is a process. Cybersecurity is not something that can be done once and for all. You have a legislation, you have a certification. This is not true. Cybersecurity is something that needs to be thought through every step of the way. And I will spend maybe just a few minutes now, because I realize that I speak a lot, as you can all tell. And I will talk about the way that we as BSA look at cybersecurity from a software perspective. And so we developed about a few years ago what we call the software security framework. And the security framework is a document that is widely available on our website. We're happy to share that. I can work with Mark to make sure that you can have access to it if you want. And it's something where we try to create a place where a framework where either policymakers or software developers can think about, hey, what we're trying to develop to implement a software in our system, in our company, in our government. How can we make sure that it will actually be protected, right? And so in order to do that, it has to be outcome based. It cannot be about, okay, I need a label. No, that's not going to work. It's like, what are you trying to achieve? Why is it you're trying to achieve that? What standards are there to exist that actually can qualify to ensure that you have that the level of assurance that is cost effective. If you need to all the time change the processes, etc., that's not going to be very good. And that also needs to be repeatable and used in a variety of different ways. And we also designed it to be technology neutral, so it can be developed in a variety of different development and deployment. It can be open source, can be proprietary. There's we're totally agnostic about this, but how do you ensure that we all speak the same language in a way, and how do we move forward for cybersecurity? So I have a few more slides to talk about the framework. Mark, if you don't mind moving to the next one. Where so we're looking at, in order to have proper cybersecurity, you need to think about the development of the software. From the inception to the moment that you're developing in this, you're looking at the capabilities. What is your software going to be doing? What's the outcome? What are you trying to achieve, etc. So to think about, because not every software is like, some software will require some authentication, some will not. So what capabilities do you want to have? And finally, how do you ensure that you keep that level of security through the entire life cycle of its use, even going to the end of life or the end of life cycle of a software, which is when the software, you don't need it anymore, or the software has become obsolete? How do you make sure that it still is protecting the data and all the information while you are not you stop using it? And so and I'll just take an example on the secure developments on the next slide. And so we've developed a variety of diagnostic statements and others. Mark, if you don't mind moving to the next one, I'll just give you a very quick snapshot, which is how do you do secure coding? How do you do testing and verification? How do you process and how you document everything that you've done? How do you look at your supply chain? Who are your suppliers, your vendors? How are you going to be working that? The tool chain, and again, you know, the identity and access management that you need to be looking at. And so, you know, I've taken like one one example, one snapshot of a page on the next slides to show you how we've been thinking about this and how we're looking at this, with for instance, in secure coding. All right, and so Mark, if you can move one more, if you don't mind. So you see, so this is something that may sound extremely cumbersome, but it's actually pretty simple, because you think about secure development. You look on the left, secure coding. Okay, so what are the potential threat that may happen in your in the deployment, in the use, and what kind of mitigations you want to have. Then you have the diagnostic statements that we're looking at, where so software development organizations document likely threats. Yeah, that is something good. And is there a way where common best practices? Yes, there's some standards that exist. There's some best practices. You see, there's a variety of elements that a company can actually look at and say, hey, yeah, all right, this makes sense. This is something that we could do. And they go every step of the way for everything. So the document is relatively long. It's relatively, and if you try to read that, before going to bed, it's probably going to be a complicated read. But if you're really trying to think about cybersecurity and then what you want to do, that's something that's extremely important. And the framework can be applied, and Mark, if you move to the next slide, both by policymakers and also by companies, by either users or developers of software. So in the policy spheres, governments, agencies, cybersecurity agencies, they can look at the framework, the principles we develop as a benchmark, so when you want to assess, for instance, you're doing, you think the European Commission or ENISA is doing certification for cloud computing. If you look at the different elements, what are the standards to which you should certify against? What are the best practices? What are the things that exist? That gives you a better understanding or a better idea of what you could be looking at, what you should be looking at, and what is interchangeable. There are different ways, and if, for instance, for a subcategory, there's like 10 standards and 3 best practices. If a company comes to you and says, well, I want to use that standard or that practice, or you can figure out that they are interchangeable and they can work. And so that even if it's not what you had in mind in the first place, that can still be something that could be useful and done. But also in the marketplace, by companies who want to use software or who want to develop software, how can they think about all these issues and develop and use and have much more secure software throughout its entire life cycle. So just to sum it up, when we're looking at this landscape, so threat landscape, and I'm not telling you anything new, it's changing every day, every second, and software is critical for the entirety of our digital environments, supply chain services, etc. And it's essential actually to combat that. And in order to do that, because no man is an island, and we need to look at this globally. It cannot happen in isolation, because otherwise we will be doing our own things on it, and that is actually great for bad actors who want to attack, because the more their differences, the more their divergences, the easier it is to attack, because nobody can help others if they are not using similar views and similar approaches. And so our framework is really there to try, and it's the starting point, right? We're not saying that we got it all right. It's just like a way for all of us to start thinking about this and to really improve software security, supply chain security, which in turn will lead to a higher effectiveness of cybersecurity. So I will pause here. I will stop now. So there's a lot of things happening in cybersecurity, both on the the legislation, but also the threats, the development, what's happening. It's a global issue. It's a joint effort, and we need to work together with industry, governments, civil society, academics, everyone who wants to participate in all this, and work together to achieve this. But I will say it once again, it's not something that can be achieved once and for all. It's a constant project. It's a constant thing that you need to always keep on thinking about and never rest on your laurels. With that, I'll stop and I'll thank you all very much for your attention.
Thank you so much, Thomas. This was, I think, to engage with this subject in such depth. I think this is one of the first times this is being done in Brazil. So I'm very happy that
Desculpe,
that
eu não estou
you.
escutando nada. Não sei se está tendo a tradução.
Eu também não.
I'm currently in the English channel. Is it coming through just fine? I heard from one of our members.
Okay. It's okay.
It is?
Yes,
Perfect.
it is okay.
So, resuming what I was saying, this is pretty much one of the first times we are hearing about this in Brazil. There's a lot of talk about everything that's going on in cybersecurity in Europe, right? But it's very different when we hear about everything that's going on and when we see it in a system like that. So thank you very much, Thomas. This is actually, I think, incredibly on point. And the thing that I would like to bring to the attention of all of our guests today, everybody who's watching, currently we have a question and answers pod on Zoom, and I will be monitoring that Q&A pod, and you can type in whatever language is comfortable to you. So you can type in English, in Portuguese, in Spanish, and I will be intermediating this to our guests or international guests. So feel free to type the questions as they appear in your head, and later on, after our second exposition, I will pick these questions for us to answer. Okay, so feel free to use it and in whatever language you feel comfortable. So again, thank you, Thomas, and please stick around. Let's have some more interesting conversations. With that, I see that there's a presentation up already. I think I was going to be the one who was going to control it, but apparently you're going to present it, David. Is that so? Are you going to present from your computer?
Yeah, if that's okay.
Perfect. So I will introduce you then. So David is really somebody who caught my attention as I was doing cybersecurity research. He comes from the Georgia State University. As you all know, it's a very prestigious university in the US. But more than that, he directs the evidence-based cybersecurity research group, which is a very interesting approach to cybersecurity. They run a lot of practical tests. They run a lot of practical research instead of doing just academic work. They balance the academic side with a lot of investigation into what criminals are doing in the real world. And that's, to me, is something that is lacking. We see a lot of work from either the police or the academia, but we don't see something that kind of tries to meet in the middle. So it's a great pleasure to have you here today, David, bringing this research to you, your comments, and it's our pleasure to have you. The floor is yours.
Thank you so much, Mark, and thank you, Thomas, for a great presentation. I think it's awesome. Sure. Can you guys hear me well? Yeah, so again, thank you so much, Mark, for inviting me to participate in this event. And Thomas, thank you so much for a great presentation. It's a great pleasure to be here in a session that focuses on legislation and policies, basically because I'm Israeli and we defy policies and regulations. That's what they teach us to do in school. Policies and regulations are just recommendations. in Israel, right? I mean, so you constantly are questioning why you're doing what they tell you to do, right? And I feel like it's very similar in Brazil. You know, I think that I'm fortunate that this was the approach I was brought by, because as an academician, it helped me question many of the theories, many of the assumptions that folks came up with during the last 200 years of science, but especially in the context of cybersecurity legislation, regulations, and policy. As you guys know, there are so many policies out there, so many legislations proposed to be, you know, formal policies and formal legislations, so many regulations. But at the end of the day, we need to ask ourselves in a critical manner, do we really need those policies and regulation? And, you know, not only if we need them, at the end of the day, what do those regulations and policies really bring into the picture? And so in this sense, what I will try to do today is I will try to convince you that the way to answer this question is by taking the evidence-based cybersecurity approach, which essentially suggests that you should question any policy or test any policy or regulation or framework in order to make sure that at the end of the day, you are getting what you were intended in the first place. And then I'll present two case studies that will present the effectiveness of the approach in the context of warning messages that here in the United States are quite popular on governmental computers. And I assume that it's similar in Brazil. Before you enter, before you log in a computer in the United States and on a governmental office, you need to read a warning saying that if you're not allowed on the computer, you're subject to penalties. We'll try to figure out whether this is really effective in nudging offenders away from your computers or not. And then we're going to also talk about a case study where we try to figure out how a policy that is being used by certificate authorities here in the United States and actually in the UK and a few other places were really effective in making sure that an organization who is asking for a TLS certificate, and we'll talk about what a TLS certificate is, but you know, in short, it's just a certificate that give you the validation that you as a customer are talking to the server of the company you are trying to connect with. We'll try to figure out whether the policies that these companies essentially enforce in the context of issuing those certificates are really effective. And that is what we're going to spend the next 20 minutes talking about. So as promised, let's start talking about the evidence-based approach and make sure that we all are you know, on the same page with respect to what it means. So evidence-based cybersecurity is an approach which suggests that what we need to do in order to really build a more secure, hygiene cyberspace is to move beyond decision makers' political, financial, social background, and personal experience when making security-related decisions, including policies and regulations, to a model in which tools adoptions, as well as policy enforcement decisions, are made based on scientific studies findings. So instead of drawing on our personal experience when we design a framework, instead of using anecdotal evidence about potential effectiveness of a policy or a tool, what we need to do before we come up with a framework or a legislation or a policy is we really need to look in the literature or conduct some experiments and try to figure out whether the legislation could actually work, right? And one important thing that we need to understand is in this sense is that when we engage in this research and we're trying to figure out useful, efficient, effective legislation and policies, we need to think about the entire cybercrime ecosystem when we sort of try to enact them. And by thinking about the entire ecosystem, I'm talking about not only tools and the policies that everybody is aware of. I assume everybody sitting in this webinar, but also the actors who populate the ecosystem. And what you see in front of you right now is the way we sort of think about the ecosystem. The cybercrime ecosystem is composed out of vendors, bad guys. It's composed out of enablers, individuals who essentially support the offender's operations. The ecosystem is also composed out of targets, those guys who, the bad guys and the enablers are trying to get all the information from, as well as the guardians. The guardians are policymakers. You can think about law enforcement agencies, and also many of the cybersecurity companies out there who are trying to protect us all, right? And we're not going to talk about the cybersecurity companies here today. We're going to focus on policies, and the important thing that we need to remember when we try to test the effectiveness of policies and legislation is that when we, before we enact a policy or regulation, we need to engage in rigorous scientific research, right? We need to test whether the policy is really effective and could really work in creating a more secure cyberspace by simply deploying several research designs that at the end of the day could support the production of useful results. Experiments are very important in this sense. So simply trying to figure out whether the policy really gives you what you are signing up for. Another very important tool that will allow us to figure out whether the policy is effective or not is surveys, sort of looking at event logs, as well as administering questionnaires, and then observations. These are all important ways in which we can collect evidence, which at the end of the day will allow us to understand whether a policy, a framework, a legislation is effective or not in accomplishing its goal. Right? And so the evidence-based approach has several key principles. Due to time restriction, I will not go through the 4 of the principles, but the major 2 I would like to emphasize is that the evidence-based approach seeks to generate and employ empirical evidence to support policy development and guardians' efforts to secure cyberspace. Another very important principle is that once we produce the evidence, we want to make sure everyone is aware of it. So everyone has access to the findings from the research we produce, and that is very much relevant in guiding policy and decision with respect to the implementation of cybersecurity tools and so on. Okay, so now that we all understand what the evidence-based approach is all about, let me take you and walk you through 2 cases that essentially are important, in my opinion, for understanding the value of the approach in guiding framework as well as guiding regulations. We have many examples. I choose to go with 2 papers we published already. And if you want those papers, by all means, I'm more than happy to send over those papers your way. The first case study I would like to discuss here today is a case study where we try to figure out whether the warning that you guys see on your computer right now, essentially a banner suggesting that if you're not allowed on the computer you're on right now, you're subject to penalties, is really effective, right? In deterring hackers from using your computers, logging into your computer, taking over your computers, and then also work with your computer. This banner that you guys see in front of you right now is essentially a requirement that NIST, the National Institute of Science and Technology here in the United States, in their framework, require organizations to have, especially governmental organizations, but also private companies. Your employees are all sort of supposed to go or read through this warning message every time they log in to the computer, with the assumption that if you're not allowed on the computer, you shouldn't. And if you do log into the computer, even though you're not allowed to, you're subject to penalties. So what we were really interested in was trying to find out whether this banner is really effective. right? Well, this banner is really effective in doing all kinds of things, but in the context of our presentation today, we try to answer whether this banner is really effective in immediate termination of system trespassing event, meaning someone saw the banner, logged in, is he gonna immediately leave the computer alone or not? And if not, we also try to figure out whether this banner will have any effect on the time in which folks, the trespassers, right, the illegitimate user of the computer, actually stayed on the system. So what we did was we took 80 public IP addresses and we deployed honeypots, target computers on those 80 IP addresses. The computers look like servers, and they had vulnerabilities on them. And at the end of the day, what we were trying to figure out was what will happen if a hacker will find those vulnerabilities, brute force to our computers, meaning hack the computers, and then see the warning. Is he going to leave us or not alone or not? So we had those 80 IP addresses. We deployed computers on those IP addresses, and then we waited for 2 months. Once hackers found our computers, what they needed to do in order to break into them is launch a brute force attack. Brute force attack is essentially an attack in which you're trying to guess the password and username of the computer you're trying to attack. Okay, so in this example, what we did was after 150 plus n number of attempts, we gave them the right credentials, and then we randomly assigned them to control and treatment group. Okay, the control group, the treatment group, I'm sorry, if we assign you to the treatment group, you would have seen this banner, right, which is essentially the banner I just showed you that suggested that if you're an illegitimate user of the computer, you're subject to penalties. And so we have like 40 computers with this computer, and hackers from all over the world, right, thinking these are real computers, logging in and working with them, and then seeing this banner. And then we had the control computers on which the following message showed. I mean, it's essentially no message. Once you got the credentials, you had clear path to start doing whatever you wanted to do with the computer. Okay, so this was the experimental design, and we ran the experiment for 2 months. We had more than 500 computers that we deployed because we ran the experiment over a long period of time, many hackers, and then we simply tried to figure out whether the warning banner I just showed you will have any effect on immediate termination of system trespassing event. In other words, you log in, you see the warning banner, are you going to leave me alone or not? And then the time that the system trespassers stayed on the system. Okay, so with respect to the first research question, we find that the warning had no effect. So I think that whatever the regulation is trying to accomplish, right, and that is essentially deterring people from engaging with the computer and logging into the computer, it doesn't work. But what we do find with respect to time is that the warning does shorten the duration of the trespassing event on the system. In other words, what we find is that hackers who received the warning, who've seen the warning, spend shorter period of time on the system than hackers who did not observe the warning. So that is really interesting. It speaks volume to the effectiveness, right? Yes or no, right, of the warning. I mean, if you're trying to accomplish, people not logging into the computer with the warning banner, then it doesn't really work. But with respect to mitigating the consequences of the system trespassing event, the warning is actually effective in doing this. Because think about the spending 5 minutes on the system versus 10 minutes on the system, right? The damage you can create, right, on the system is 2 times as big, right? If you spend 10 minutes versus only 5 minutes. Okay, so this is just one example of how we tested the effectiveness of a policy, of a regulation, in the wild, right? In the field, in the ecosystem, with real hackers who did not know that they participate in a real experiment. Okay. The second example I would like to share with you deals with certificate authorities' verification efforts of customers who are trying to get EV certificates, validation certificates for the identity of the server that a company essentially maintain and hold. Okay, here in the United States, when you log into a website, if you have a big company and you want to increase your customer trust in your identity and the fact that you are this bank, or you are this hospital, or you are this university, you want to have a certificate that validate that you are who you say you are, right? And NIST is very clear about that. NIST suggests that the National Institute of Science and Technology guidelines suggest that the entities which are responsible for issuing those certificates are certificate authorities. And before they issue the certificates, what they need to do is they need to walk you through a validation process that at the end of the day will give you the certificate along with the green padlock that you guys see on the screen right now. That is essentially what this certificate is all about. The goal, security function of the TLS certificates are two-folded. The first, to make sure that the identity of the host is indeed the identity of the organization you're trying to reach. And second, the second goal is to enable the encryption of information of data exchange between client and server. So making sure that all the traffic that goes between the server and the computer is encrypted, meaning nobody but the customer and the company knows what kind of information has been requested from the server. Okay, so to issue those certificates, NIST, as we indicated earlier, suggested that certificate authorities will be charged with the task of employing various validation processes. And I assume, you guys engage in software and internet technology, so I assume you guys are familiar with the validation process and the 3 different validation levels that you can go through. You can have a DV, OV, and EV validation. DV is the most simplistic validation. At the end of the day, the certificate authority doesn't really validate that you are who you say you are. They just verify your domain name. In the OV, the certificate authority does verify that the organization exists and then issue the certificate for you. And then in the EV, the EV validation essentially suggests that the certificate authority will validate that the organization exists, right? And then they will make sure that you will get the certificate only after an extensive process of vetting. You're gonna have to provide several documents in order to make sure to get the EV certificate, which is the highest level of validation. You need to apply. You need to provide with verification of physical address and telephone number. You need to verify that the domain name is actually yours. Then they will call you to make sure that you're not cheating them. And only after all this process, they will allow you with the EV certificate, which at the end of the day would look something along these lines. Banks really needs EV certificates because the assumption is that with the green padlock, as well as the bank name on the URL, you increase the level of trust among your customers, and then they're more willing to do business, right? And go check their online banking, purchase things online, and so on and so forth. Okay, this is this is really, so this is the verification process that the certificate authority wants you to go through. And this is their framework. This is their policy for giving you the certificate you need. But the question is whether this process that these guys, will make you go through, including paying a lot of money for the certificate, is really effective. Right? I mean, they're trying to verify you, and you will pay hundreds of dollars for the certificate. The process really works. Well, I mean, in 2019 we started to question that, because we were able to see many people in darknet markets, darknet environments, talking about EV certificates, extended validation certificates, and offer them for sale on those platforms. And that was really curious. I mean, we got really curious, because the way we understand that only certificate authorities should be able to validate who you are, right, and give you the EV certificate, right? And so we started thinking, why would criminals actually need the EV certificate? And we quickly realized that at the end of the day, what they're trying to do is they're trying to boost your trust before stealing your identity and your credentials. So we all are familiar with the phishing attacks. This is just an example for a phishing attack from some kind of a bank that we worked with in the past. If you clicked on the link here, like if this attack actually ended up in your inbox and you clicked on the link here and you didn't have a TLS certificate, most often what would have happened is that Google would have blocked your access to the website, right? It would have sent a warning saying you don't want to be there. But with TLS certificate, if you install the TLS certificate, you could have, Google would not have blocked you, and you potentially could have ended up on a scam page that looks exactly like the bank you're looking for, in this case, PayPal, but the URL is completely different, right? The URL of PayPal. This is not a PayPal page. This is a scam page. And so this is what the criminals need this. They need the TLS certificate because they want to increase the level of trust. So as I indicated earlier, we found in 2019 several people selling EV certificates, and not only that, they said that they will give the EV certificate from well-known certificate authorities. And I assume that you guys in Brazil know GoDaddy, DigiCert, GeoTrust. These are all well-known certificate authorities. So what we did was we tried to understand what is the modus operandi of the evidence, the EV certificate fraudsters. How do they do that? Could it be that the CAs are involved in this process, right? And could it be that the bad guys are essentially working with the policies that the CAs have come up with and essentially defraud them? And so what we did was we put together this fake website, which was supposed to be a bank, okay? I really like this, logo or the motto of the bank: "Who make it easy to get your money." The bank does not exist, of course, right? The whole point of this scam page is to show that we can gain an EV certificate, right? And then send this to people and then potentially steal money from them. So we've put together this website, and then we contacted one of the vendors and asked to purchase the EV certificate. We had an exchange with the offender. We ended up paying, so this is the UK, we ended up paying on this bank in the UK that we created between $8,000 to $10,000. And a week after we sent the first installment, what we got from the offender was essentially certificate of incorporation and registration documents. In other words, we had the fake bank that the bad guy now made sure that the organization exists. The bank now exists. He took the bank name and applied to the UK Association of Businesses, and now we have certificates that indicates that the bank really exists. Okay, so we took that, and the other thing that the guy did was he registered the bank, the fake bank, on Dun and Bradstreet's databases, right? And so you see he gave us an address. The organization is legit, and if I give you the name, you can actually go and find it in Dun and Bradstreet and the official UK government database. We took this information, and after we sent the second installment, because we didn't think that that's what he's going to do, after receiving all those documents, we sent the second installment. What the guy did was he took all those documents that are needed in order to get the EV certificate and sent it to the certificate authorities, right? To make long story short, after a week long, we actually got an email from the certificate authority with the EV certificate we needed. So now, after we have the certificate, we have a website with the name of our bank here, which I will not which I will not expose because I don't want to get, I don't know who's listening to this conversation, and then maybe it's one of the vendors out there, right? So we will not expose that. But now we have a bank that we can start, working with, right? We have an identity of a real bank, right? That now we can start doing some business with, right? So, of course, and this is an evidence that the certificate authority essentially provided us with a certificate. Okay, this is valid. It was valid. Of course, it was revoked after we approached the certificate authority and told them about this. But essentially what the guy was doing was taking advantage of the policy, right, of the certificate authority. And it was really interesting, and it was really sometimes even funny to see how the guy defrauded them. Remember, one of the things that the certificate authority was supposed to do was to call the guy. They actually called him and he didn't answer. You know what? What was funny was that he realized that he got the call and he didn't answer. So he sent them an email saying, I was busy, please call me again. They did. And after that, they sent the certificate, the EV certificate, which is kind of mind-boggling for me. Another potential red flag that those certificate authority essentially missed was the address. Remember, in all the documents I showed you here, the formation documents of our company, there was an address, right? They need to validate that the address you provided essentially existed. Well, in the UK, if you go to Google and you type in the address we provided, or the bad guy provided, you would have seen this building. I don't know how banks looks like in Brazil, but here in the United States, banks do not look like this, right? The front of a serious bank does not look like the bank, like what you're seeing here in the picture. So, a very important red flag that the certificate authority missed, even though they have a policy, right, in place that essentially suggested that they should verify, the physical address, you should call people, So I guess, in conclusion, what I would recommend folks in Brazil and all over the world essentially do is think clearly, right, about potential legislation, potential policies that folks would like to implement in the context of their organizations. Test those policies in order to really understand whether those policies really work or not, and only then enact them. Making a policy or a legislation in the context of cybersecurity doesn't make any sense if people can bend it. And at the end of the day, your organization will be less secure. With that in mind, I will stop, and I'm more than happy to discuss any of the things I presented.
Thank you so much, David. That was really interesting that we get to see from one side what legislators are doing, and on the other hand, what is going on in the real world. What are they trying to do, right? What kind of threats are these legislations meant to combat? That's the kind of question that I think is really important that we are addressing today. So seeing both the solution side and the problem side. So in that sense, thank you so much for bringing this technical, but still, I think, pretty understandable explanation. I would like to think that most attendees could follow at least most of it, but with any questions that might be left, I suggest that you put it on the question and answers pod. It's on Zoom on the bottom part of your screen. The YouTube channel is also being monitored in case there is any question coming from there. I will rely on the people monitoring to post it on the chat for me. Thank you very much. And if we are good for now, I would like to move on to the questions and answers part. I will give David a second to be able to have a look at the question posed by Alvaro and give it a read. I have already talked a little bit with Thomas so that we can get started with him on this one. And David, I would also like to point out that there was a prior question on YouTube which asked, do you have a guideline of security and privacy for developers? So something to keep in mind moving ahead. So I will start with Alvaro's question now. He asks, in other words, implementing and enforcing a secure software development lifecycle, an SSDLC process should fill almost all gaps discussed here. Is there any other insight or best practices worth mentioning? Thank you. So with this, I would like to call on Thomas to start with an answer. And then if David wants to react to this, he can go right after. If you could, Thomas.
Yeah, absolutely. Thank you, Mark. And thank you, David, for this, because your presentation makes me question the answer I was going to give Alvaro. So I'm going to be, thinking also as I'm answering Alvaro. I think so. From what I was talking about, the way that the software companies, develop their products, their software, and that software that also will be, interacting with a variety of other software, right? So, we're thinking, software is pretty easy. Software is millions of lines of codes, and you have an environment, be it a phone, a tablet, a computer that interacts. So software security is a thing that companies need to think about. How will all that work together? And thinking about this, being really mindful of that, and having all these best practices, trying to figure it out, is extremely important. Now, what's also important in ensuring that you have secure software development, it is also the part of that David is playing as a researcher, right? Which is you try to test things, right? So they were testing policies, but their researchers will also test for vulnerabilities, things that are not necessarily known. And so there's a very important component of all this, which is the, it's called CVD, Coordinated Vulnerability Disclosures, where, researchers, any person that's interested, that finds a problem, a vulnerability, also can inform companies so that they can work together to fix the problems. I think, as I was saying before, nothing, in a way, it's a beauty. It's also a tragedy because it's never finished, right? The work is never finished. You need to be on your guard constantly as you're thinking about this. And even if you introduce all of this, you're not immune to potential attacks, vulnerabilities, things that may arise that we don't know today, but that will become known tomorrow. So it's a, as I would say, it's also a joint responsibility, trusting each other, working together, as industry, academics, researchers, others, to try to work it out. So it's what I would say is the life cycle, the process, the constant checking, the constant monitoring is extremely important. That's a thing that responsible organizations and responsible researchers, because David could have done this and actually been a bad guy and say, hey, I'm going to scam people for millions of pounds. That could have, but no, it's more to assess things and being able to, then alert when something didn't work and try to work it out. That is what needs to be done. It's really like collaborative efforts, thinking about it and never resting 1 second. Because just like organizations need to be thinking about this all the time.
I mean, and on my end, I mean, I echo what Thomas is saying. I mean, it definitely needs to be a joint effort. One of the things that I think are really important to emphasize is the fact that if you solely focus on software and technology, you're only answering half of the question, right? I mean, so if you were my student, I would have given 50%, right, of the answer. Software is just, a tool, but at the end of the day, you need to think about the human, you need to think about the way folks are, using the technology and bypassing the technology. I mean, we sit on the dark net, we sit on many, many platforms, and Mark can vouch for us. Software or technology itself will not work because some of the people we're seeing, they can bypass anything. Anything is hackable. Anything could be taken over. And so what you need to do is you need to definitely invest some resources in developing more secure tools, and maybe the evidence-based approach would be relevant in the context of how to make sure that the programmers, you really nudge them not to leave vulnerabilities and so on. But at the same time, you need to understand how the software really works in the context of the ecosystem. Who is there to try to bypass your software? One of the methods that we're seeing right now that bad guys are trying to bypass are facial recognition, right? Facial recognition, fingerprints recognition. People thought that with facial recognition, you're done. I mean, we essentially blocked access to folks' smartphone, computers, whatever. No, the bad guys came up with a software that allows them to bypass the technology. So software is just half of the answer. What needs to happen is we need to invest more resources in understanding how human, right, the bad guys, the people who support the bad guys, as well as the target, use the software and some of the vulnerabilities that the software has, and that could be taken advantage of.
Yeah, and David, you're absolutely right. I think, and I was talking about this from a software perspective on our development of software, but the second example you took, this happens in the real world. It's about people giving certificate and fake. These are things that are and it's all. There's a big component which is you mentioned. It's education, awareness, making sure that people know about this, that you can look for these things. As an example, and I'm sure it's true in most organizations. We at DSA, we are a trade association, right? So we don't have state secrets. Every year we get cybersecurity training because it's the human in control. So we get alerted about phishing, about all the things. These are essential to do, and it's part of an entire, cybersecurity, awareness and thing, which is offline, online, and absolutely that is absolutely essential component.
So Thomas, I will challenge you on the training aspect as well, right? Because we know that the training, again, from research that we conduct, training is only good to a certain degree. So what are you going to do? So everything, the training is important, right? But it doesn't, sometimes it doesn't really work. It really depends on the type of individuals who go through the training, whether they actually understand what you're talking to them about. There's so many factors that we need to think about in the context of cyberspace and cybersecurity. And I agree with you 100%. I mean, it should be a joint effort, right? Of people like you working with academia and law enforcement agencies, as well as with normative citizens who, at the end of the day, we need to understand, to develop this more secure cyberspace for.
No, absolutely. It's correct. I mean, you're right with trainings. I mean, I think a training is whatever you do with it, but at least there's the opportunity to be aware, to be made aware. Then and again, it's always, I think, in software, and people say, the problem is always between the computer and the keyboard, right? And it's always the human, and it's about individual responsibilities also about what you do. But if you don't know, if you didn't have the opportunity to do that, then so yeah, it is a very complex and it's never ending problem. Yeah.
I think in this we actually answered both our questions about best practices. So this is actually great, and unfortunate as it is, we're very close to our ceiling. We're supposed to stop at 3:30 Brazil time, which is a shame because I do feel like we brought a lot to the table, and there's still so much we could discuss. But this is a good first step, I think. There's definitely no reason why we couldn't have another one of these in the future. So I will, with a heavy heart, move to the closing part, even though I feel we could go until 5 p.m. here. So I would like to give word to Wanda Scartazzini. She is one of the most experienced people in internet governance in Brazil. She has been part of almost every process you can imagine in terms of the development of this area. And it will be a great pleasure to hear some final considerations from her. And Wanda, I leave it to you to wrap up the session.
Muito obrigada, muito obrigada. Vou falar em português, aproveitando aqui a oportunidade da tradução, que já agradeço. Gostei muito das apresentações, achei elas muito esclarecedoras. Muito obrigada, Thomas e Dave, por compartilharem, né? Sempre, nós começamos a conversar aqui, logo que começou a nossa reunião, falando que, ao fim e ao cabo, tudo vai cair na questão da proteção de dados, que cada vez mais estão exigindo segurança cibernética para todas as organizações. A nossa própria legislação, ela cria e exige condições, tanto para as públicas, para as privadas, a cadeia de fornecedores, mas eu sinto falta, por exemplo, da questão do risk management, o gerenciamento de risco como uma das obrigações que deviam estar na nossa certificação, vamos dizer assim, de proteção de dados, né? Na minha opinião, são requisitos adicionais relevantes que a gente devia sugerir ser incluído nas atuais regulamentações que estão sendo feitas pela nossa Agência Nacional de Proteção de Dados, né? Uma coisa que eu acho que gostaria de compartilhar também é que a ABES hoje, né, além de ter sido a criadora da Frente Nacional de Proteção de Dados, ela é hoje quem gerencia as questões do que a gente chamou agora, e foi instituído, o Fórum Nacional de Proteção de Dados. Eu acho que essa é uma questão de gerenciamento de risco, das necessidades de atenção da própria agência com essa questão do gerenciamento de risco, que precisa ser incluído como fator crítico para garantir a segurança geral, né, das nossas organizações, né? Da mesma forma, esse framework da Software Alliance, eu acho que muita gente já conhece, né? Talvez devesse merecer mais, a própria ABES está envolvida com a Software Alliance há muitos anos, mas talvez ela deva levantar mais essas questões desse framework em relação aos nossos associados, né? Eu acho que isso é um ponto aí para as nossas discussões em diretoria. Agora, eu adorei os testes do David, né? São sensacionais, porque, na verdade, o Brasil tem diversos exemplos de ataques, e essa sensação de segurança, na minha opinião, é o principal aspecto que leva à real falta de segurança, né? Então, capacitação, sem dúvida, é uma solução a médio e longo prazo, mas para uma comunidade grande como o Brasil e de diversos níveis de entendimento e capacidade de compreensão das questões, né? Eu lembro até quando nós andamos promovendo aqui os TLDs, os novos top-level domains, junto ao Bradesco, eu estava envolvida, e uma das questões foi o próprio marketing do Bradesco, que, ao colocar ponto Bradesco, ficaria mais fácil para as pessoas perceberem que a URL era mesmo do Bradesco, né? Porque precisa ter alguma coisa que chame a atenção numa sociedade onde, digamos, a compreensão desses fatores mais técnicos é bastante reduzida, né? os hackers estão sempre à frente de todo mundo. Então, eu achei assim sensacional a ideia de testar as regulações e ver se elas são efetivas ou se só dão essa sensação de segurança, que, como eu disse, para mim, elas são o pior, digamos assim, o maior ataque à segurança, a sensação errada de segurança, né? A sensação que nós estamos seguros e, na verdade, não estamos, né? Enfim, Mark, eu acho que foi sensacional, adorei, eu acho que a gente pode repetir isso em outros fóruns, inclusive, perdão, mas eu queria agradecer muito em nome da ABES, e a gente vai ter que terminar, infelizmente, né? Vou ter que tomar uma água aqui. Mas eu adorei, acho que foi sensacional, gostei muito do Thomas, foi fantástica a apresentação do Davis, adorei. Muito obrigada novamente a todos que participaram, aos que fizeram perguntas, e Mark e eu estamos aqui para tentar ajudá-los também, qualquer outra questão que apareça. Muito obrigada, e ficamos aí muito agradecidos. Thank you, Thomas. Thank you, David. Perdão. Podemos encerrar. Muito obrigada a todos novamente. Mark, se quiser, suas últimas palavras.
I would like to just give the opportunity for our guests 30 seconds and any closing words, and from there we can wrap up.
I'll start. I just want to thank you all very much for the invitation, for bringing us here with you. I think it was fantastic to speak with all of you. Thank you, ABES. Thank you, ICANN. David, it was great to be your co-panelist today. I really enjoyed and appreciate the conversation. As said, my colleague Pitanga, who's based in Sao Paulo, is on the ground, and so he and me and our colleagues around, we're happy to continue this conversation. I think it's important that we have them. So look forward to the next time where we all speak together. But ABES, Wanda, Paulo, and Mark, thank you so very much for this. It was amazing.
I'll just thank you guys all for having me. Thank you, Thomas, for a really great presentation. And I look forward to staying in touch and potentially working on stuff together.
Likewise.
Thank you very much, everyone. With this, we can wrap up this session. Thank you, ABES, for hosting all of us. This was an amazing event.